When two of my friends and I were juniors at SUNY Purchase College back in 2018, we decided to sneak into Playland Park in Rye, New York. One of the friends of mine grew up in Rye and had done it many times before, so while I was nervous about getting arrested for trespassing, I felt a bit reassured that the park wasn't very well monitored at night. At around 1 a.m., we drove and parked our car next to a large fence and attempted to scale it. It was rather difficult and required us to step onto each other's hands to get over, which gave me intense anxiety about how we were planning to get all three of us back over the fence on the way out. After both my friends got over the fence, I attempted to chicken out and wait in the car, but finally decided to join in. And after several minutes of struggling, I made it over the fence on my own and we began walking while lighting up a joint. It was pitch black at this point and almost all the lights in the park were off. We approached the water flume ride, which went up about 100 or 150 feet, and then it dropped into a steep slope. Along the side of the ride was a staircase for technicians and employees, which my friends decided to climb for a better view. At this point, I chickened out and decided to stay at the bottom out of my fear of heights. As they ascended the stairs, I looked out across the park and I noticed something very strange. We weren't alone at the park. Several hundred feet from us was a pond with what appeared to be a small boat or a raft inside, and 4 or so people riding inside it with flashlights attached to their heads. What was even stranger was the fact that there were 2 dark figures swimming in the pond, looking for something underneath the water. I could barely make out the silhouettes of these figures, but after a few minutes, I noticed that they could see us and began mobilizing the boat in our direction. I frantically started whisper screaming to my friends who were all the way at the top of the water ride, but they could barely hear me. At this point, the boat had reached land and the little lights on their helmets were heading in our direction fast. My friends finally raced down the stairs and we began sprinting as fast as we could, down a boardwalk that was dimly lit, and back towards the way that we came. As we sprinted down the long and straight boardwalk, I realized that we were completely visible and started to accept the reality of being caught or arrested. We somehow rounded a corner, got back to the fence, and climbed over safely, hopping into our car and dipping immediately. I couldn't believe we didn't get caught, as the figures chasing after us were no more than a few hundred feet away when they had spotted us. Still to this day, I wonder why the heck there were people swimming around in a pond in an amusement park at 1:30 in the morning. My friend had told me that kids had drowned in that pond before, making me wonder if they were searching for a body. I googled any article that I could find, but to no avail. Me and my 2 friends are still totally puzzled by this experience, and I can't think of a very logical explanation. Just thinking about it now gives me chills. On my first summer back home from my freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizza in a town around 30 minutes away from where I lived. The area, in rural Georgia, is known for having places that are in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place's whole shtick was that it delivered to even to the most remote areas imaginable within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences that summer, from the call that came from a long-abandoned warehouse to the dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws. But one will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was getting fairly late at night, around 10:30, so I was confident at the time that I would be sent on no further calls before closing at 11. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close. I was given the address and a single box of hot dough and sent on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway. or rather the lack thereof. There was a mailbox, but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was really just grass, and a barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was even en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house coming over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded by overgrown woods. I guesstimated where the rest of the driveway led, and ended up parking in a grassy patch that could have been the walkway just as easily as it could have been the front yard. Headlights aimed towards the porch as per company policy. I walked up to the door, but I believe that calling it a door is generous. It was a door frame, all right, but the door itself was just a large slab of wood, propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth red flag were also on the door. This included the A4 sheet of printer paper with the words, "Around back," scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where somebody had self-engraved the door with the title, Manson Family Ranch. Typically, I would never go around to the back of a house, especially a shady unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop of the day, and I was ready to get it over with and be on my way home. Against my better judgment, I went around to the back of the house. The door back there was an actual door, but it was covered in both cobwebs and fresh spiderwebs. Clearly, this was a door that had not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked. I counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house, and I could hear no movement from inside. I knocked and counted again, and repeated the sequence 3 more times before I was finally creeped enough to decide to return back to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to knock 1 more time, and as I was counting, I heard something in the woods behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough, I could make out distinct running footsteps coming directly towards me through the brush. As I'm standing there, coming to terms with my impending demise, I followed the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I could clearly see the woman who had stepped out. She was relatively old, in her 60s I would guess. She had long blonde gray hair, which was tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked to be originally a white nightgown, but at the time it was dingy and closer to a beigeish brown color. She was absolutely barefoot, and her feet were covered in dirt and what had to be blood, presumably due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly woods, where there was no trail to be seen. I never learned her name, but I still affectionately refer to her as Red Flag number 5. She stopped short when she saw me, and started to shake her head no with her eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most messed up headlights ever, as she took a few more steps towards me, reaching out to me finger pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would have at the time when she spoke. You know how southern people can either sound like loving grandmothers or backwoods killers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled. "Oh, no, 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 no. No, honey, no. You get on, you get on out of here." I wish I could say that I listened. I ran, I laughed. But I was so in shock at how the events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on the back burner, while I tried to figure out just what in the Kentucky Fried F was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving, even if I could not make my mouth move to ask her what was happening. or even what to do with the stupid pizza in my hands. She looked at me like she could have smacked the heck out of me right then and there, and proceeded to deliver red flag number 6 through 12. "Darling, did you hear me? You deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here and then they don't get to leave." So, I finally quit being the dumb person in a horror movie when I realized that this was not a funny little ghost story. This was a 5'3", 116-pound me, potentially being targeted to be robbed or kidnapped, or worse. So I dropped the dumb little pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings by the way, and started running back to my car, which I had stupidly left on and unlocked, as was usual for most of my deliveries. As I neared the car, I heard a slam from behind me, and I looked over my shoulder to see that the wooden door had been pushed over and had fallen into the porch beneath it. As I was closing the car door, an older man was limping down the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant at me, calling me a little bee, telling me to get out of the car right now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttery and shaky, and along the lines of, "Pizza's out back." I floored my dad's crappy little 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid trees on the out trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from any road that actually had a name, let alone painted lines. I reported it to my manager, and he said that he contacted police, but nothing ever came of it that I'm aware of. Either way, that was my first and hopefully last personal encounter with the self-proclaimed Manson Family Ranch. Okay, before I get into the story, there are a few things I need to explain about my country, South Africa, for you to fully understand the story. In South Africa, it's normal to have high brick walls with electric gates, electric fences, alarms, etc. And the crime here can be pretty bad. It's also pretty normal to have big gardens. My family and I are big animal lovers, so at the time, we had 6 dogs. 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers, and 2 dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely in and out of the garden, as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's normal to have a live-in domestic worker, a maid, or a gardener. Like the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. For the story, our DW is Ellie, and our gardener is Vince. So, this happened in 2007 and I was 9 years old. My older brother was 10, and I had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprised us after work. You may think it's a bit young, but it was used for emergencies or to communicate with our parents. Anyways, it's an important piece of info for the story. We don't usually leave our veranda door open at night, due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night. So of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open, and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room setting up our new cell phones, all excited. Nellie's daughter, Anne, who's like an older sister to us, she was 18, was helping my brother and I. My dad was somewhere in the house and my mom was in the bath. I specifically remember Anne having a comment about how the dogs were not shut up and how annoying it was, and that's when I noticed it too. Sure, they would bark, but it was usually the dachshunds that yapped when the bigger dogs just chilled. Plus, it would only happen for a few minutes and then they would get over it. But something was different that night. as even the bigger dogs were barking nonstop. My dad appeared in his room and mentioned to us that he had noticed the dog's incessant barking, and he was going to go check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off on my head, and I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother had asked to investigate with him, and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad ventured out to our garden with my brother in tow, when my dad had noticed that the dogs were all grouped, growling and going nuts at the dark corner behind our in-the-ground swimming pool. The best way to describe it is our garden beyond our pool hits like a slight decline, so we have a few steps leading down the hill to the bottom end of our garden. We usually have a lamp that lights it up, but my dad had noticed how that lamp seemed to be off, which confused him because he could have sworn it worked the other night. Either way, my dad said he got his gut-wrenching feeling because of this and because of how out of character the dogs were acting. He called after them and they would usually come running, but tonight they all seemed to just look at him and then turn back around and continue going crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside of the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother not to come with him because of his feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dog seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out of view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed that the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched to these steps, and as he put two and two together, it was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet and avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple, and immediately knew that it was a gun. Out of the darkness stepped 4 other men in balaclavas, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive, and asked him where my brother was. That he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. Why? My dad said something came over him, and before he knew what he was saying, he responded with, "He's gone inside to press the panic button." As he said that, he saw how all of these guys started to panic. They started speaking in a different language. It's not common for people to speak it, but my dad had actually grown up on a farm where he learned it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy holding the gun said in a different language, "Crap, the cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this guy and grab what we can and go." The others seemed apprehensive, and a smaller guy seemed really on edge, and continued to say how he can't go back to jail again, and that they needed to get the heck out before the cops showed up, which would be any minute. He was panicking. My dad then fed on this guy's fear. My dad then interrupted them, speaking English, pretending to not understand what they were saying, and said that we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area, and since my brother had pushed the panic button so long ago, they'd probably be here any second. And that did it. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them, and the smaller scared guy started freaking out all of the other guys, saying that they needed to leave ASAP or else they would be caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence, until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves, their plan slowly turning to crap, as a third guy put it. The aggressive one, pointing the gun at my dad's head, slowly lowered it as they had started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto his crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart to the house. As luck would have it, as my dad ran into the veranda door, my oblivious brother was heading out with a torch. My dad scooped him up under his arm mid-ran and sprinted into the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, I know, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quick as possible, without even thinking. Anne and I were obviously also oblivious to everything when my dad rushed through the bedroom door, slammed it shut and told us to go upstairs into the attic. that there are 5 guys with guns outside, and they're here to hurt us. Get upstairs, now. And my heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs with Anne right behind me. My mom ran out of the bathroom in a towel, not too far behind. We sat there in the darkness and silence. I swear that you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just waiting to hear something below us in the rooms. My mom cursed, saying that she didn't have a phone, and neither did my dad. But in my hand was my brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than right now. My mom dials the police, and I kid you not, they asked where we lived. We explained and they told us that it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry. Click, and the line went dead. We're now not only crapping ourselves, but we're flabbergasted too. My mom starts cursing like a sailor again, and that's when my dad realizes, dang, he didn't close the veranda door. And what about Ellie and Vince, who are in their rooms, blissfully unaware of the danger that they're in? He gets his firearm in the safe in the attic and tells us that whatever we hear, to not come downstairs, to stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad not to leave us, but he tells us that he has to go and get Ellie and Vince before something bad happens to them. Now, there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. Anne's understandably in hysterics because she's also fearing for her mom downstairs. My dad disappears and the air is thick with tension. We can still hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that those men were still on our property. My mom then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say that they'll be over in about 10 minutes. They say to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all wait in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating that these men are in our house. But there was just silence. The only sound was the dog's barks outside. After what seemed like hours, mostly likely a couple of minutes, we heard stomping coming up the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was my dad with Ellie and Vince. Luckily it was. We all hid for a while and no one dared to speak. The dogs had seemed to calm down considerably, but they were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang and my dad told us to wait while he checked if it was the security company, and sure enough it was. He opened up and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up and my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body had endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there was actually 7 pairs of footprints, and that these guys bent these spikes on our wall and just climbed over. We got an electrical fence shortly after, so there must have been 2 other guys hiding in these shadows that my dad hadn't seen, which is actually creepy in its own right. South Africa's violent crime is quite bad, and it's too common for horrible things to happen during home invasions. I was obviously so young at the time that I didn't know the horrors of the world, and I was just scared of my family getting hurt. But now that I'm older, just the thought of 4 women being in the house and my mom being in nothing but a bath towel gives me chills to this day. The cops said the fact that there were so many guys instead of like 1 to 3 indicates that these guys possibly had sinister intentions. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button. Also, I'm so glad my dad understands multiple languages and could manipulate the situation to benefit us. Lastly, my family will forever be in debt to our good boys and girls that warned us that night. A terrifying and life-changing outcome would have 100% happened that night, had it not been for our incredible dogs. From that day onwards, my dad always gave them leftover rice or meat with their dinner. R.I.P. Impy, Shudo, Dash, Fudge, Winkles, and Pikachu. I'm sure there is a special place in heaven reserved for you angels.